At 7:12 p.m. on the coldest night of November, my son-in-law hurled my suitcase onto the porch, while my daughter stood at the window and said nothing. 6 months without a paycheck, Dad. We can't keep supporting you. I stared at her in disbelief. I helped pay for this house, I said. My son-in-law smirked. That was before you became a burden. Then the door slammed shut. An hour later, I stood alone in a freezing ATM vestibule staring at a balance of zero. That was when my phone rang an unknown number, and a stranger's voice said quietly, "Your family just made the biggest mistake of their lives. I appreciate you being here for this one. Before we start, drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted completely? Just a simple yes or no." I read every single one. Please note, certain details have been adjusted for storytelling and reflection, but the core message is what I hope stays with you. The suitcase hit the frozen porch steps with a dull thud, and my daughter closed the door without another word. I stood on the Newton estate porch in -9 degrees Celsius watching the brass handle turn and lock from the inside. Celeste Caldwell, 32 years old, stood silhouetted in the window for 3 seconds before pulling the curtain shut. My daughter. The woman I'd raised alone after her mother died, a woman whose face I'd sometimes thought in quiet moments looked nothing like mine, and nothing like her mother's either. I'd always assumed it was just the way genetics worked. The woman whose wedding I'd funded, whose mansion deposit I'd written from my retirement account, whose silhouette now disappeared behind imported Belgian linen, as if I'd never existed. Thane Blackwell, 35. Her husband had thrown the suitcase. He was the one who'd avoided my eyes, who'd said the words with clinical detachment, "Enjoy the shack, Vernon." No honorific. No father-in-law. Just my first name delivered like an invoice stamp. The blizzard hit harder. November in Boston, late storm, the kind that turned streets into static and made headlights disappear after 20 feet. I picked up the suitcase, 35 years of career as Chief Operating Officer at Apex Logistics, reduced to one piece of luggage, and started walking. 3 blocks. That's how far I made it before my fingers went numb enough that I couldn't feel the handle anymore. The mansion behind me, $2.35 million in assessed value, purchased with 1.5 of my retirement funds, as their deposit had already vanished into the white. Ahead, a yellow rectangle of light 24-hour ATM vestibule. I pushed through the glass door into fluorescent warmth that felt like violence after the cold. My phone screen was fogged, fingers too stiff to unlock it on the first try. Second try. The banking app loaded in slow motion, each pixel rendering like a small cruelty. Joint account, Celeste Caldwell, Vernon Caldwell, balance $0. I stared at the number. Not low. 0. Absolute. I opened the transaction history, scrolled to that morning, November 28, 9:47 a.m., and found the entry: withdrawal $1,500,000, authorized by Celeste Caldwell. She'd emptied it that morning, hours before, throwing me out. While I'd been across town closing my office at Apex for the final time, packing framed certifications and mentor plaques into cardboard, she'd been draining every dollar we'd saved together. Joint account holder. Legal. Clean. Gone. I switched to my personal account. The one in my name only opened in 1987 when I started at Apex as a logistics coordinator. Personal account, Vernon Caldwell, balance $847.23. 35 years of labor. 3.5 decades of 6 a.m. starts, and client calls and supply chain emergencies and salary negotiations and performance reviews and cost-cutting meetings, packaged neatly into the number 847 beneath a dim yellow ATM light, while the blizzard turned the window into static. I closed the app, put the phone in my coat pocket, picked up the suitcase, pushed back into the storm. By morning, I'd secured a room in Dorchester. $650 a month first and last, due immediately, which left me $197 until I found income. The room had water-stained walls the color of old newspapers, and a space heater that clicked every 40 seconds like a countdown. The landlord, 60-something with paint-stained jeans, took my cash and handed me 2 keys without asking why a man my age was renting by the week. I opened my laptop on the fold-out table. The Wi-Fi password was taped to the wall, guest 2847. It took 3 tries to connect. My inbox loaded. 432 unread messages, most from the last 6 months, when Apex had been collapsing, and I'd stopped checking email outside of work hours. Severance notices, LinkedIn pings, automated HR updates, and one buried in June sent at 11:34 p.m. on a Friday from Apex Internal Audit. Subject: confidential review, irregularities flagged. I opened it. The email was clinical. No pleasantries. Just data: 23 irregular wire transfers between March and May. Total sum $4.7 million US, all approved under power of attorney by Thane Blackwell, acting chief financial officer during Vernon Caldwell's medical leave. I read it twice, then a third time. Medical leave. I'd taken 6 weeks in April for knee surgery, routine outpatient, back in the office by May. Standard protocol: temporary POA to the CFO for time-sensitive approvals. Thane had been interim CFO for exactly 42 days. 4.7 million. 23 transactions. April through May. I clicked the attachment, an Excel file, 2 tabs. The first showed wire dates, amounts, destination accounts. All offshore, all shell entities with names like Meridian Holdings, LLC, and Crescent Advisory Group. The second tab mapped the accounts back to their beneficial owners. Every single one traced to Thane Blackwell, or Curtis Blackwell, his father. Apex hadn't collapsed because of market forces. It had been gutted. Systematically. Surgically. While I was recovering from knee surgery, my son-in-law had bled the company dry and buried the evidence in Friday night audit emails that nobody reads. I sat back in the folding chair. The space heater clicked. For the first time since the porch, I did not feel cold. I felt clarity. The kind that comes when chaos resolves into a single sharp point. My phone rang. Unknown number. Boston area code. I answered. "I know you just read that file," a man's voice said. Middle-aged, calm, like he was commenting on weather. "Meet me tomorrow morning. Congress Street, the coffee shop on the corner. 7 a.m. Don't be late." The line went dead before I could respond. I walked to Congress Street the next morning in pre-dawn cold, the phone call replaying in my head. 7 a.m. The coffee shop on the corner. Don't be late. The Buick lost control 20 feet ahead of me, fishtailing on black ice before slamming sideways into the snow-filled drainage ditch. The sound was wrong, not the explosion crack of movies, but a dull, crumpling thud followed by silence. Steam rose from the hood. The driver's door faced the sky at a 40-degree angle. I ran. The window wouldn't open. I could see the driver inside, older man, 70s, slumped against an inflated airbag, eyes closed. I pulled my car key from my pocket and slammed the metal edge against the passenger window. 3 hits. The glass spiderwebbed, then gave. I reached through, unlocked the door, climbed halfway into the tilted vehicle. The driver was breathing shallow, fast. Blood on his forehead, airbag powder on his coat. I checked his pulse at the neck, weak but steady. His seatbelt had locked. I fumbled with the release, finally got it free, and dragged him through the passenger door onto the snow. 911 dispatch answered on the second ring. I gave the intersection, described the injuries, kept my hand on the man's chest to monitor breathing. He was thin, expensively dressed under the winter coat, cashmere tailored. His face had the kind of lines that come from decisions, not just age. I took off my coat and laid it over him. December in Boston. The wind chill was brutal. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes. Paramedics took over with practiced efficiency, neck brace, backboard, oxygen mask. As they lifted him onto the stretcher, the old man's eyes opened. Just for a second. He looked directly at me. "Thank you," he whispered. "My name is Leland." Then his eyes closed again, and they loaded him into the ambulance. I stood on the sidewalk in shirt sleeves watching the vehicle disappear toward Boston Medical. A police officer took my statement, name, address, description of the crash. I answered mechanically. My coat was in the ambulance. The meeting at Congress Street was 40 minutes late. I walked to the coffee shop anyway. It was empty except for the barista and one man in the furthest corner booth. He looked up when I entered, made brief eye contact, then looked back down at his phone. I ordered black coffee and sat across from him. "You're late," he said. "Car accident on the way here. I called the number you left, no answer. A man was unconscious in an overturned vehicle. I pulled him out and waited for the ambulance." He studied my face, looking for the lie. I assumed, then nodded. "Dexter Graves," he said. "I was Apex's in-house counsel until they fired me 8 months before the bankruptcy filing." Dexter Graves was 52, graying at the temples with the cautious eyes of someone who'd signed documents he regretted. He wore a button-down shirt with no tie sleeves rolled to the elbows despite the cold. Former lawyer. Unemployed. Careful. "Why contact me?" I asked. He slid a small USB drive across the table. Black plastic, no label, smaller than my thumb. "When I signed a non-disclosure agreement when they terminated me," he said. "I can't use this information without breaching the contract. But you're different. You're the victim. You have standing." I picked up the drive. "What's on it?" "Everything," Dexter said. "Wire transfer records, offshore account registrations, email correspondence between Thane Blackwell and his father Curtis about moving funds through shell entities. The complete embezzlement trail. 9 months of systematic theft while you were COO totaling $4.7 million. A career built on reading contracts. I understood exactly what he was handing me. "This is wire fraud," I said. "Federal jurisdiction. This is enough for the FBI." "Yes," Dexter said. "But I can't file it. The NDA forbids me from disclosing proprietary financial information, even criminal activity, without a court order. If I go to federal agents, Apex's bankruptcy trustee will sue me into oblivion. I'll lose my license, my pension, everything." He leaned forward. "But you didn't sign anything. You were the target. Victims have legal standing to report crimes committed against them. The NDA doesn't bind you." I turned the USB drive over in my hand. 35 years of career. 4.7 million in theft. And this man, this unemployed lawyer who had every reason to stay silent, was handing me the weapon. "Why?" I asked. "Why risk this?" Dexter looked at his coffee. "Because I knew. I saw the irregularities in April. I flagged them internally. Curtis Blackwell told me to drop it. When I didn't, they fired me and made me sign away my ability to speak. I've been carrying this for 8 months, watching Thane walk free, watching you get blamed for Apex's collapse in every trade journal." He looked up. Someone had to stop them. I held the USB drive, looking at Dexter Graves across the scratched coffee shop table. He had just surrendered his own professional safety to give me this. His hands were shaking slightly, not fear, but the aftermath of adrenaline, the physical cost of doing something that might destroy him. "Thank you," I said. He nodded, once stood and left without another word. I sat alone for 10 minutes, the USB drive in my pocket, thinking about wire fraud and federal jurisdiction and 4.7 million reasons why my son-in-law wanted me discredited and silent. Then I walked back to the rooming house. The black SUV was idling across the street when I arrived. Tinted windows, engine running, exhaust visible in the cold. I kept walking, didn't look directly at it, pulled my phone from my pocket, and opened the camera app as if checking messages. I angled the phone, captured the license plate. Massachusetts registration. 7-character vanity plate MRDN LLC. Meridian LLC, Thane's company vehicle. The same shell entity listed in the USB files. I stepped inside the rooming house and watched through the window. The SUV didn't move, just sat there, engine idling, someone invisible behind the tinted glass. They knew where I lived. They were watching. The question was, what would they do next? The black SUV was gone when I left the rooming house the next morning, leaving only tire tracks pressed into overnight snow. But the question remained, why had they been watching at all? I took the bus to Massachusetts General Hospital. Leland Sherwood was in a private room on the 4th floor, sitting upright in bed with a breakfast tray and a folded newspaper. 75 years old, the admissions nurse had said. But the eyes that met mine when I knocked were not the eyes of a frail old man who'd just survived a car crash. They were sharp, calculating, alert. "You saved my life," he said. No preamble. "Sit down." I sat in the visitor's chair. "I wanted to check that you were recovering." "I'm recovering fine," Leland said. "Mild concussion, 3 stitches, bruised ribs. I'll be discharged this afternoon." He folded the newspaper, precisely set it aside. "Do you know who I am?" "No," I said. "Good," Leland said. "Keep it that way for a little longer." He studied me for a long moment. "Then, you need work. You need income. And you need access to information that most civilians can't obtain." I said nothing. Waited. "There's a small maritime consulting firm on the South Boston waterfront," Leland continued. "They need a port operations advisor. Someone with logistics experience who can analyze shipping manifests, track container movements, identify supply chain irregularities. The salary is modest enough to cover a room and meals, but the office has unrestricted access to the Boston port shipping databases." He said it so casually, as if offering me exactly what I needed before I'd even articulated the need was coincidence. "Why would you arrange this?" I asked. "Because you pulled me out of a burning car without knowing who I was or what I could do for you," Leland said. "That tells me something about your character, and because I believe you're going to need resources in the coming months." He reached for the water cup on his tray, took a sip, set it down with deliberate care. "I will not tell them where you are," he said quietly. "Survive this, Vernon. You're infinitely stronger than all of them combined." I left the hospital with a business card for a maritime firm I'd never heard of, and the growing certainty that Leland Sherwood knew far more than he was saying. The office was on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse overlooking Boston Harbor. 1 desk, 1 computer, a window, with a view of shipping cranes and container stacks. The firm's owner, a man named Garrett, who asked no questions, gave me the login credentials and left me alone. I opened the USB drive Dexter had given me. The main file was encrypted. Password prompt, the name of the true entity who signed the Apex bankruptcy order. I pulled up the audit email on my laptop, scrolled to the signature block beneath Thane's name. There, C. Blackwell, authorized signatory. I typed Curtis Blackwell. The file opened. 237 pages of wire transfers, shell company registrations, email, threads, offshore account statements. I read for 3 hours straight, cross-referencing names against the Boston Port database. Curtis Blackwell, age 62. Managing Director, Meridian Capital Partners. Registered address, Beacon Hill, Boston. Beneficial owner of 17 shell entities, including the ones that had received Thane's wire transfers from Apex. I searched deeper. Found a corporate filing from 2004, Thane Marcus Blackwell, date of birth, March 15, 1987. Father Curtis Blackwell. This was not a scheme Thane had concocted alone. This was a family conspiracy structured long before my daughter ever married him. Curtis was the architect. Thane was the instrument. And Celeste, I closed my eyes, opened them, kept reading. By midnight, I had this complete picture. Curtis controlled Meridian Capital. Thane had used my power of attorney to funnel Apex funds into Meridian's shell network. The bankruptcy had been orchestrated to cover the theft, and my daughter had married into this operation, whether knowingly or not. The next morning, Celeste knocked on my rooming house door. She was alone at first, standing in the hallway, with a canvas bag, eyes red, like she'd been crying. When I opened the door, she stepped forward and hugged me. I stood rigid, arms at my sides. "Dad," she whispered, "I'm so sorry. I know things have been terrible. Thane and I want to make it right." Thane appeared from the stairwell carrying a blue folder. He smiled, warm, apologetic, rehearsed. "We brought some documents," Thane said, stepping into the room uninvited. "A premium senior health care program. Comprehensive coverage, no premiums, no copays. You just need to sign here to activate your benefits immediately." He placed the folder on the fold-out table, opened it to a signature page flagged with yellow tabs. I picked up the document, read the title, Guarantee and Indemnification Agreement. Not healthcare, a financial instrument. I turned to page 7, Clause 12.3b. Guarantor assumes full and unlimited personal liability upon borrower default, including but not limited to principal interest penalties and collection costs not to exceed $5 million. $5 million. Unconditional guarantee. I kept reading. Page 11. Clause 15.2c. Recourse provision in the event loan proceeds are demonstrably misapplied from stated purpose. Guarantee liability reverts to primary beneficiary of proceeds. I read it 3 times. They were trying to trap me into guaranteeing a $5 million loan. But the recourse clause, the clause they assumed I wouldn't read, stated that if Thane misused the funds, the debt would revert to him, not me. They'd written their own escape hatch into the contract, assuming I'd sign without understanding. But I understood perfectly. I also understood something they didn't. I had visited my bank a week ago, the day after reading Dexter's audit email. I had requested a signature card update, a new authorized signature specimen, which would make any document signed with my old signature legally questionable. "Where do I sign?" I asked. Celeste's face brightened. Thane pointed to the yellow tabs. I signed, dated it, handed the folder back. Thane smiled, satisfied. Celeste hugged me again, longer this time, like she believed her performance. "We'll take care of you, Dad," she said. They left. I stood in the empty room watching through the window as they climbed into Thane's SUV and drove away. The pen was still in my hand. They thought they'd trapped me. But I knew something they didn't. The signature I'd just given them was worthless. And the recourse clause they'd buried in page 11 was about to become the mechanism of their own destruction. I sat alone in the Dorchester room after they left, staring at the photocopy of the guarantee I'd just signed, and felt the first cold taste of satisfaction. I called Leland. He answered on the first ring. "How did it go?" "Muck, they brought me a guarantee," I said. $5 million, personal liability. They disguised it as healthcare paperwork. Silence on the line. Then, "And you signed it." "That I signed it," I said. "But I need you to understand what I did first." I explained the signature card. A week before Celeste's visit, the same day I'd changed my mailing address to the Dorchester rooming house, I'd requested an updated signature specimen at the bank. Entirely legal. Standard procedure when updating account information. The bank clerk had me sign a new card, which became my official authorized signature on file. The guarantee Thane brought me had been prepared weeks in advance. He'd photocopied my old signature from previous documents, expecting me to replicate it. But the signature I'd given him was my new one. When the bank cross-referenced the guarantee against their records, the signatures wouldn't match. The document would be ruled void. And Clause 15.2c, the recourse provision they'd buried on page 11, would trigger automatically. The entire debt would revert to Thane and Celeste. "Oh, you planned this," Leland said quietly, "before they even showed up." "Yes," I said, "and they have no idea." None. Another pause. Then, can you come to the office right now? Someone wants to meet you, and I think it's time I told you the truth about myself. I took the bus to South Boston expecting the waterfront warehouse. Leland's text redirected me financial district. Different address. 31st floor. I stood on the sidewalk looking up at the glass tower. This wasn't a maritime consulting office. This was corporate headquarters. The directory in the lobby listed floor 31 as private, no company name, just a suite number. I stepped out of the elevator and realized I had completely misjudged the scale of this operation. The entrance was frosted glass with no signage. I pressed the intercom. The door unlocked with a soft click. Inside, marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Boston Harbor, a reception desk, staffed by a woman in business attire who looked unsurprised to see me. "Mr. Caldwell," she said. "Mr. Sherwood is expecting you. Conference room 3. I walked down a hallway lined with photographs, shipping vessels, port facilities, aerial shots of container yards, spanning what looked like miles. At the end, a conference room with a long table, 4 attorneys in suits, and Leland Sherwood standing at the window. "This is the corporate legal headquarters of Sherwood Global Maritime," Leland said without preamble. "My conglomerate." I stopped in the doorway. "Your conglomerate." The South Boston office was real, Leland said. "But it was also a test. I needed to see if you'd take honest work when you had nothing. You passed." He gestured to the table. "Sit down. We have a lot to discuss." One of the men stood middle-aged, navy suit without logos, the kind of neutral professionalism that screamed federal government. Leland said, "This is FBI Supervisory Special Agent Reed Campbell." Reed Campbell extended his hand. I shook it. His grip was firm, measured the handshake of someone who'd spent years dismantling corporate fraud and knew exactly how much pressure to apply. "Mr. Caldwell," Campbell said, "the FBI has been tracking Meridian Capital Partners for 9 months on suspicion of large-scale securities fraud. Curtis Blackwell is our primary target. Thane Blackwell is a secondary actor. The Apex bankruptcy is one node in a much larger pattern of corporate asset stripping." He opened a folder, slid a document across the table. I recognized names, dates, dollar amounts, some matching the data from Dexter's USB drive. "Your guarantee," Campbell continued, "if played correctly, serves as a legal anchor. The recourse provision allows us to reverse the debt and apply pressure. But we need proof that Thane diverted the $5 million from its stated purpose. Without that proof, the clause doesn't activate." "What stated purpose?" I asked. "The guarantee application claims the funds are for Newton Estate property improvements," Campbell said. "If we can prove Thane used the money for anything else, offshore transfers, shell company investments, personal expenditures, the recourse provision triggers automatically. The debt reverts to him and your daughter. And we have grounds for fraud charges." I looked at Leland. "You've been working with the FBI." "For 6 months, Leland said. "Curtis Blackwell tried to extort shipping contracts from Sherwood Global 2 years ago. I reported it. The Bureau opened an investigation. Your case intersects with ours." Campbell leaned forward. "Mr. Caldwell, we need 6 weeks and your full cooperation. We're building a case that will dismantle Meridian Capital entirely. But we need you to help us prove Thane's diversion of funds." One of the attorneys, a woman in her 50s with silver hair, placed another document in front of me. "To activate the recourse provision," she said, "we must secure evidence of your son-in-law deploying the $5 million outside the stated mandate. There is a fast route, but it requires you to take a calculated risk." I looked down at the operational plan. It was detailed, dangerous, and dependent on Thane taking one specific action, accessing Sherwood Global's shipping database to divert a high-value container as proof he was using the guaranteed funds for criminal operations, not property improvements. The plan required bait. It required someone Thane trusted to have access to information he wanted. It required someone willing to be the lure. "You want me to give him an opening?" I said. "Yes," Campbell said. "We need him to believe you're vulnerable, that you have access to valuable intelligence through your port operations work, and that he can exploit it." I realized I was standing inside a chessboard far larger than I'd imagined. The FBI, Sherwood Global, Meridian Capital, Curtis Blackwell's securities fraud, my daughter's marriage, the Apex bankruptcy. Every piece connected. "What happens if he doesn't take the bait?" I asked. "Then we continue building the case the slow way," Campbell said. "But it takes 18 months instead of 6 weeks. And there's no guarantee we can prove the fund diversion in time to activate your recourse clause." I looked at the operational plan again, read the risk assessment, read the contingency protocols, then I nodded. 2 weeks into the FBI cooperation, I sat alone in the Sherwood office close to midnight, and the anomaly in the database finally revealed itself. The operational plan was simpler than I'd expected. I would work legitimately at Sherwood Maritime's port operations desk, analyzing shipping manifests and container routing data. Normal work, legal work. But with one critical difference, I had access to query logs showing who else was searching the database and what they were looking for. The FBI called it defensive intelligence. I called it watching for Thane to take the bait. The office was dark, except for my desk lamp and the screen glow. Through the window, Boston Harbor stretched black and silent, dotted with cargo ship lights. I'd been reviewing access logs for 3 hours, looking for patterns, anomalies, anything that suggested Meridian Capital was probing Sherwood's shipping data. And there it was. 3 separate queries executed over the past 5 days, all targeting the same container, Sherwood 3.7 Charlie. Scheduled arrival, Charlestown Port, Friday morning, 6 a.m. Origin, Singapore. Contents listed as industrial machinery components. The queries had come from different IP addresses, different times of day, but the digital fingerprints matched Meridian Freight Services, Thane's subsidiary. First query container, routing history for the past 6 months. Second query, detailed manifest contents and declared customs value. Third query, real-time GPS tracking and estimated arrival window. This wasn't market research. This wasn't competitive intelligence gathering. This was operational reconnaissance. I pulled up the container's full profile. Declared value 1.2 million. Actual value, according to Sherwood's internal notes, closer to 3 million. High-grade precision manufacturing equipment, the kind that moved through gray markets if you knew the right buyers. Thane was planning to intercept it. I sat back in the chair, staring at the screen. A logistics career built on pattern recognition, I don't see threats through emotion. I see them through data, and this pattern was clear. Thane had graduated from embezzlement to cargo theft. Federal crime, interstate commerce violation. The kind of charge that carried 10 years minimum. I printed the query logs, stapled them together, and placed them in the folder Agent Campbell had given me. Then I opened my phone and texted him. Pattern detected. Subject planning interception. Friday a.m. Need meeting. The reply came back in 30 seconds. 0800 tomorrow. Same location. I closed the laptop, looked at the folder, thought about what came next. The FBI could surveil the port. They could position agents to witness the interception attempt. But surveillance only worked if Thane actually showed up. If he sent someone else, a contractor, a hired crew, the connection back to him became circumstantial. We needed someone on the inside, someone who knew the operational details, someone Thane trusted enough to involve directly. I opened my wallet, and pulled out a business card I'd been carrying since November. Dwight Hayes. The name was printed in simple black text above a phone number. No company logo the card was from before Apex collapsed back when Dwight had been my personal driver. 71 years old, reliable as sunrise, the man who'd driven me to every port inspection, every client meeting, every critical negotiation for 15 years. We'd both been laid off the same day. I'd said goodbye to him in the Apex parking lot, shaken his hand, told him I'd help with references. Then the eviction happened, and I'd lost track of everything except survival. But Dwight had been more than my driver. He'd worked logistics coordination during the transition close enough to Thane's operations to see how freight moved, where shipments went, who handled the ground-level execution. If Thane was planning a container interception, Dwight might know the details, or at least know who Thane had hired to execute it. I looked at the business card, remembering the man who'd driven me through Boston traffic for 15 years without ever being late. Who'd waited in parking lots during 3-hour meetings without complaint, who'd told me once that loyalty wasn't about the paycheck, it was about the handshake. Would desperation have changed him? Would 8 months of unemployment have made him vulnerable to Thane's money? I looked at the phone number, considered the risk. Considered that calling him might expose the entire FBI operation if Dwight had already been compromised. Considered that not calling him meant losing the one person who might know Thane's plan from the inside. I pressed dial. The phone rang once. I pictured Dwight in whatever room he occupied now, apartment rooming house, maybe a relative's spare bedroom. 71 years old, with no pension, no savings, just whatever work he'd managed to scrape together after Apex died. The phone rang twice. I realized I didn't know what I'd say if he answered. Hello, Dwight. I know we haven't spoken since the company collapsed, and both our lives were destroyed. But I need you to betray your current employer for the sake of an FBI investigation. The phone rang 3 times. I almost hung up. Almost pressed the red button and tried a different approach, surveillance without inside intelligence, a longer timeline, a safer plan. Then I heard the click of connection. Not Dwight's voice. Just the ambient sound of wherever he was, low music, the clink of glasses, the rumble of construction equipment outside. A bar, a tavern. South Boston, if I placed the background noise correctly. Someone breathing on the other end. Not speaking yet. Just listening. Quite, I said quietly. It's Vernon Caldwell. I know we haven't talked since November, but I need your help. And I think you might need mine. Silence on the line. The background noise continued conversations. I couldn't distinguish a door opening and closing, the hiss of a draft beer being poured. Then finally a voice I recognized. Gravel rough, careful, the voice of a man who'd learned to measure his words. I was wondering when you'd call, Dwight said. We met the next evening at the South Boston Tavern, where he'd answered my call. Before I could say a word, Dwight Hayes placed $15,000 in cash on the table between us. Banded stacks, $100 bills, still crisp like they'd come straight from a bank withdrawal. The tavern music was loud enough to mask our conversation, classic rock, the clink of bottles, Friday night construction workers ordering rounds at the bar. Dwight Hayes was 71 years old, gray-haired and lean, with the permanent tan of someone who'd spent decades behind the wheel in all seasons. He'd been my driver at Apex for 15 years, the man who'd navigated Boston traffic while I worked in the back seat, who'd waited in parking lots during 3-hour port inspections, who'd never missed a pickup in a decade and a half. He sat across from me now, hands flat on either side of the cash, and spoke before I could ask. Your son-in-law paid me this to acquire the manifest schedule for container 3.7, Charlie, Dwight said quietly. I took the cash. I needed the money for my wife's medical bills. I had no other choice. I looked at him. Didn't interrupt. Let him finish. Sarah's got stage 3 breast cancer, he continued. Treatment's $80,000. Insurance won't cover the new protocol. We've been trying to get on a clinical trial, but the wait list is 9 months, and she doesn't have 9 months. He gestured at the money. Thane offered me 15 to get him the shipping route. I said yes. Then I went home and couldn't sleep. Because I knew what he was planning. And I knew if I helped him, I'd be destroying the one man who ever treated me like I mattered. I recognized it immediately. He was a victim of the same machine that had destroyed me. Not malicious. Just pushed into a corner where survival meant compromise. I reached into my coat and pulled out an envelope. Placed it on the table next to Thane's cash. Inside $20,000 from Sherwood Global's discretionary operational fund. Agent Campbell had authorized it that morning. "This is for your wife's medical expenses," I said. "No strings, no repayment. Sarah gets the treatment she needs." Dwight stared at the envelope. "I don't understand." "In exchange," I continued, "you will feed the manifest route to Thane exactly as he requested. But it will be a route that I personally alter. You'll tell him the container arrives Thursday night at Charlestown Port Dock 7, with a 4-hour window before transfer to the Sherwood warehouse. You'll give him the security rotation schedule I provide. And you'll confirm the cargo value matches his research." Dwight looked from his envelope to me. "You're setting a trap." "Yes," I said. "And I need someone Thane trusts to be the messenger. Someone he's already paid. Someone who has every reason to deliver accurate information." "Why do you trust me?" Dwight asked. "Because you answered the phone," I said. "And because you brought his money here to confess instead of spending it." Dwight picked up the envelope, opened it, counted the bills with shaking hands. Then he pushed Thane's $15,000 across the table toward me. "I can't keep this," he said. "Yes, you can," I said. "You earned it by agreeing to help him. Now you're earning mine by helping me instead. Take both. Get Sarah into treatment tomorrow." Dwight Hayes looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded once and stood. "I'll call Thane in the morning. Tell him I've got the route." 3 days later at 1:30 in the morning, I stood in the Charlestown Port container yard watching Sherwood's technical crew complete the swap. -10 degrees Celsius. Freezing ocean air. The kind of cold that turns breath into fog and makes metal painful to touch. Cargo cranes loomed overhead like industrial dinosaurs' floodlights carving geometric shadows across stacked containers. Container 3.7. Charlie sat open on the concrete apron, its doors swung wide. The crew worked in coordinated silence, 8 technicians in Sherwood Maritime uniforms, moving with the precision of people who'd done this operation before. 847 crates of high-end electronics came out. 847 concrete blocks of identical weight went in. Each block embedded with a hidden GPS tracker. Each crate labeled, photographed, logged, and secured in Warehouse 4 under armed guard. The crew chief approached me, tablet in hand. "Swap complete. Container weight matches original manifest within 0.2%. Seal numbers replicated. Custom stamps duplicated. Gross tonnage identical." "Are you certain?" I asked. "There is $10 million in real cargo sitting in Warehouse 4 under heavy guard." The crew chief looked at me. "Mr. Hayes briefed us on the operational stakes. The contents of this specific container are worth far more than $10 million. He was right. The concrete blocks weren't valuable. The GPS data they'd transmit when Thane moved them was priceless. I watched as the crew resealed the container with microscopic precision, identical seal numbers, customs stamps, documentation. A forklift hoisted it back into the designated slot in the container stack. Grid position D73. Exactly where Dwight's manifest said it would be. A logistics career built on methodical precision. And this operation was precise. I signed the completion form. The crew dispersed. The port returned to its usual rhythm of distant machinery and ship horns echoing across the harbor. The following night, I sat in the Sherwood office reviewing port schedules when my phone vibrated. GPS alert. I opened the tracking application. The screen showed a map of Greater Boston, with a single red dot moving north along Route 99. Container 3.7, Charlie, in motion, but it wasn't heading south toward the Sherwood delivery address in Quincy. It was moving north, away from Boston, toward Everett, Massachusetts. I pulled up the route projection. The container was following back roads, avoiding highway cameras, taking a path designed to minimize visibility. Thane had taken the bait. I called FBI Supervisory Special Agent Reed Campbell. He answered immediately, voice alert ready like he'd been waiting by the phone. "They are moving the box," I said. "It's not heading to the Sherwood delivery address. It's moving north toward Everett. Route 99 currently passing Assembly Square. Estimated arrival at destination 40 minutes. We have surveillance in position," Campbell said. "Do not approach the area. We'll handle it from here." The line went dead. I sat in the dark office watching the red dot move across my phone screen. 40 minutes. 40 minutes until Thane's crew opened a container worth $10 million and found 847 concrete blocks transmitting their exact coordinates to the FBI. 40 minutes until the trap closed completely. The call from FBI Special Agent Reed Campbell came at 11:30 p.m. Thane Blackwell had been arrested in Everett, caught opening a container filled with concrete. I sat in the Sherwood office with the phone wedged between my shoulder and ear, listening to Campbell narrate the surveillance in real time. "They are cutting the seal," Campbell said. His voice was calm, professional, the narration of someone watching through binoculars from a concealed position. Opening the container doors. 3 subjects. Your son-in-law is center. They are looking inside. He's holding a block of concrete. He's reading something stamped on the bottom. I could hear background noise through the phone, wind-distant traffic, the creak of the container doors. "He dropped it," Campbell continued. "They're running, east toward the vehicles. We have units moving to contain." Sirens erupted through the phone line. Distant at first, then closer, converging. "We have them contained," Campbell said. "Thane Blackwell is in custody. Federal charges: interstate transportation of stolen goods, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, tampering with commercial shipping manifests. He'll be arraigned tomorrow morning." I sat in the dark office looking out at the harbor lights, feeling something that wasn't quite satisfaction and wasn't quite relief. Just the mechanical completion of a sequence I'd set in motion. "He posted $500,000 bail within 2 hours, Campbell added. "Released tonight, but we have him on federal charges now. The container theft connects directly to the misuse of your guarantee funds. The recourse clause activates." I thanked him and ended the call. The next morning, Celeste was already seated when I arrived at the Back Bay coffee shop. She wore a navy blazer and cream blouse designer handbag on the table beside her, makeup applied with precision. She looked composed, strategic, not like someone whose husband had been arrested 12 hours earlier. "Dad," she said as I sat down, "I need to show you something." She slid the handbag across the table. I opened it. Inside, a leather-bound ledger, the kind accountants used before everything went digital. I flipped through pages, handwritten entries in Thane's script, documenting 3 Delaware Shell LLCs, 2 offshore Cayman accounts, detailed transaction logs, showing the complete path of funds siphoned from Apex. The entire conspiracy documented in his own handwriting. "So I found it in his office safe," Celeste said quietly. "I know what you're doing, Dad. I know you're working with the FBI. I know Thane's arrest wasn't random, and I'm not going down with him when he sinks." She leaned forward. "So use this to force him into signing a divorce settlement. I keep the Newton mansion, my accounts stay untouched, and I walk away clean. You get your revenge, I get my freedom, and Thane gets what he deserves." I looked at my daughter across the coffee shop table. Not because she was betraying her husband, but because I finally realized she had never truly loved me a single day of her life. This wasn't daughterly concern. This was a survivor calculating exit strategy. "Sit here and wait for me. I said. 20 minutes. Don't leave. I stood and walked outside. The Back Bay sidewalk was crowded morning commuters. Tourists photographing brownstones, the usual urban rhythm. I walked to a brick wall 50 feet from the cafe entrance and pulled out my phone. 2 weeks earlier, I'd contacted a physician named Dr. Morrison with a DNA sample request. Several strands of hair from Celeste's coat collar retrieved from the folding chair where she'd sat during her visit to the rooming house. My own cheek swab. Chain of custody documented. Independent laboratory analysis. I dialed his number. Dr. Morrison answered on the second ring. Mr. Caldwell, I have your results. Go ahead, I said. Had a 0.0% probability of biological paternal relationship, he said with clinical precision. The samples show no genetic markers consistent with paternity. There is no possibility that you are the biological father of the subject. I stood on the sidewalk listening to traffic rush past, watching my breath turn to white vapor in the January cold. 32 years. 32 years of loving a child who shared none of my blood. 32 years of birthday parties and school pickups and teaching her to drive and walking her down the aisle. My wife had taken this truth to her grave. Celeste had known or hadn't known, but either way she'd treated me like disposable infrastructure the moment it became convenient. The truth cuts, but it is also the final door being unlocked. The truth that sets you free from carrying what was never yours to carry in the first place. Thank you, doctor, I said. Please send the full report to my email. I ended the call. Stood there for another minute watching people walk past with their coffee cups and briefcases living normal lives, where daughters loved fathers and families meant something beyond legal contracts and shared addresses. Then I walked back inside the cafe. Celeste was still seated scrolling through her phone, confident and composed. She looked up when I approached. I slid an envelope across the table. The DNA report printed that morning from Dr. Morrison's email. She opened it, read the first page. Her face changed not with sadness, but with genuine panic. The calculation in her eyes shifted to something raw. Dad, she said, I can explain. I am not here to pass judgment on anyone, I said. My voice was level calm, the same tone I'd used for 35 years in boardrooms and port inspections. I just want you to know I loved you for 32 years and it had nothing to do with blood. And you chose to treat me like this. I have my answer. I picked up her handbag with Thane's ledger. Well, these are going exactly where they belong, I said. Not divorce court, criminal court, FBI evidence submission. Your husband's financial records will help build the federal case. And you, whatever you choose to do next, is between you and your conscience. I stood. Celeste reached for my arm. Dad, please. I stepped back. I loved the daughter I thought I had, but that person never existed, and I'm not going to keep pretending she did. I walked to the exit, pushed through the door into morning sunlight, stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking back through the glass. Celeste remained frozen at the table, staring after me, the DNA report still in her hand. For the first time in this entire story, I smiled. Not a happy smile. The smile of a man who had just laid down his final burden without needing to explain himself to anyone. 3 days later, I stepped into the FBI conference room at One Center Plaza for the first time in my life, carrying every piece of evidence that would destroy the Blackwell family. The room was institutional, long table. 4 agents seated along one side, projection screen on the far wall, official recording microphones spaced at precise intervals. Leland sat beside me in a navy suit, briefcase, open, organized files laid out like surgical instruments. FBI Supervisory Special Agent Reed Campbell sat at the head of the table. He gestured to the evidence I'd brought, Dexter Graves's USB drive, with the original embezzlement trail, Celeste's leather-bound ledger documenting the shell company network, the GPS tracking matrix from the Everett container operation, raid footage from the FBI's on-site arrest, and a 47-transaction audit trail connecting every dollar that had moved through Meridian Capital Partners. "Mr. Caldwell," Campbell said, "walk us through the timeline." I did. December eviction. Dexter's USB. The signature card trap. Container 3.7 Charlie. Thane's arrest. The ledger Celeste provided not out of loyalty, but calculation. Campbell listened without interrupting. When I finished, he opened a folder and slid a document across the table. "This evidence integrates directly into our active investigation of Meridian Capital Partners," he said. "We've been tracking Curtis Blackwell for 9 months on suspicion of large-scale securities fraud. Your son-in-law's cargo theft provides an immediate criminal hook under Title 18, Section 659. The ledger confirms financial structures we'd only identified through subpoena. The container operation gives us witnessed federal crime." He tapped the document. "This is a corporate cooperation agreement. You would be formally designated as a cooperating witness. Your testimony, your evidence, your operational assistance, all of it becomes part of the federal record. In exchange, the Bureau provides full protection protocols and ensures your role is documented for any civil recovery proceedings." I read the agreement. Standard federal witness language cooperation duties, confidentiality requirements, protection provisions. At the bottom, a signature line. "Mr. Caldwell, do you agree to sign an official corporate cooperation agreement?" I signed without hesitation. Campbell countersigned. Leland's attorney witnessed. The document went into an official evidence envelope with a red seal. This was the beginning of vindication, formal, measurable, backed by the machinery of the state. Campbell closed the folder. Then he leaned forward, expression shifting from administrative to operational. "There is a timing issue," he said. "Your son-in-law is hosting a massive investor gala at the Fairmont Copley Plaza in 10 days. Web Logistics' 5th anniversary. 300 guests, mostly potential investors and existing capital partners." I felt the shift in the room's energy. "If Thane secures new capital from investors before we can execute our warrants," Campbell continued, "the victim count will double, possibly triple. He's already facing federal charges for the container theft, but he's out on bail. He's operating as if the arrest never happened. And if he raises another 5 to 10 million at this gala, that money disappears into the same offshore network before we can freeze accounts." Leland spoke for the first time. "You need the gala stopped." "We need it used," Campbell corrected. "We need witnesses. We need Thane and Curtis in the same room on record soliciting investment while under federal investigation. And we need someone inside who can document behavior, confirm attendance, provide real-time intelligence." He looked at me. "We need you to do one more thing." I understood immediately. "You need me at the gala." "Yes," Campbell said. "As a guest, observing. The Bureau will have agents embedded in catering staff security valet service. But we need someone who belongs there. Someone Thane invited. Someone whose presence creates operational pressure." I thought about walking into the Fairmont Copley Plaza ballroom in a rented tuxedo, standing in a room with 300 people who had no idea the FBI was building a case that would collapse the entire operation. Standing across from the man who'd married my daughter, who wasn't my daughter, and stolen everything I'd built. "I'll be there," I said. 5 days before the gala, the invitation arrived. I found it in the Dorchester rooming house mailbox. A heavy white envelope with my name handwritten in blue ink, no return address. Inside, embossed cardstock with gold foil lettering. "Annual Gala Web Logistics, 5th anniversary. Black tie. Fairmont Copley Plaza Grand Ballroom. March 10th, 7 p.m. At the bottom right hand, written in the same blue ink, "Dad, hope you can make it. Thane." I held the invitation, reading the message 3 times. This was unmasked provocation. They wanted me there. Wanted me to witness their success, their recovery from the arrest, their ability to operate despite federal charges. Wanted me to stand in the ballroom as the impoverished father, the discredited executive, the man they'd erased. A prop. A demonstration of dominance. They thought they'd broken me. They thought they'd won. It was time to show them just how wrong they were. I called Leland. He answered on the first ring. The invitation arrived. Yes, I said. Handwritten note from Thane. He wants me there. Of course he does, Leland said. Curtis will be there too. This is their victory lap. They think the FBI arrest was a speed bump. They think they've already moved past it. I'm going, I said. Are you? Silence on the line. Not hesitation calculation. I wasn't invited, Leland said slowly. Web Logistics and Sherwood Global don't have public business relationships. My attendance would raise questions. Then raise them, I said. I need someone in that room who knows the complete picture. Someone who can coordinate if things go wrong. Someone who isn't afraid to be seen. Leland remained silent for 3 seconds, considering the invitation photo I'd texted him. Then his voice came through the phone, calm and commanding. Book my table, he said. The one closest to the stage. He hung up without further elaboration. I stood in the Dorchester room holding the embossed invitation, understanding what Leland had just committed to not watching from the shadows, not coordinating from a distance, but sitting center stage at the moment of confrontation. 4 days until the gala. 4 days until every piece of evidence, every trap, every careful move converged in a single ballroom with 300 witnesses. The next morning, Curtis Blackwell's assistant called to request a meeting. 4 days before the gala, Curtis Blackwell sat across from me in the private Beacon Hill dining suite, evaluating me as if pricing a distressed asset he was about to acquire. The restaurant was the kind of place where reservations required references, where private dining suites came with soundproofing and staff who understood discretion. No menus, no prices. Just a table set for 2 with white linens, crystal water glasses, and coffee service. Curtis Blackwell was 62 years old, managing director of Meridian Capital Partners, with the kind of presentation that came from 4 decades of high-stakes negotiations, tailored charcoal suit, silver cufflinks watch that cost more than most people's cars. He had the smooth cadence and immaculate posture of a man who owned everything he looked at. Until today, I sat across from him, drinking coffee from a porcelain cup. The same generic blend I drank in my Dorchester room. $4.99 a tin at the corner store. It tasted identical. Mr. Caldwell. Curtis began folding his hands on the table. Let's not waste each other's time. I'm prepared to make you a very generous offer. This was our first direct confrontation. Not through Thane, not through intermediaries. The architect of the conspiracy sitting 3 feet away, close enough that I could see the calculation in his eyes. I'm listening, I said. Curtis slid a folder across the table. Inside a 1-page agreement, dense legal language dollar amount highlighted in yellow. It's the $800,000, he said. Wired to an account of your choice within 48 hours. In exchange, you execute these waivers, sever all ties with Sherwood Maritime, and terminate any further communication with any active investigation. I read the document. Standard severance language dressed up as a settlement. The waivers released all claims against Meridian Capital Web Logistics Thane Blackwell, and buried on page 3 Curtis Blackwell personally. The termination clause was more interesting. Caldwell agrees to cease all cooperation with federal, state, or local law enforcement regarding matters related to Meridian Capital Partners or its affiliated entities. They wanted me silent, bought, removed from the board. I set the document down and picked up my coffee cup. Took a sip. Set it down with deliberate care. Do you know I spent 35 years as a logistics COO, I said. I know how to read an offer, and I know exactly what a desperate man looks like. Curtis's expression didn't change. I'm offering you financial security, Mr. Caldwell. $800,000 is more than you've seen in a year. It's enough to rebuild. Start over. Walk away from all of this. No, I said. One word, simple, final. Curtis leaned back slightly. No. No. I repeated. I'm not interested in your money. I'm not interested in walking away. And I'm certainly not interested in signing a document that protects you from the consequences of stealing from your own son-in-law's company. 35 years as a logistics COO taught me to read desperation, not in what men offer, but in why they're offering it at all. Curtis wasn't here because he was generous. He was here because the FBI investigation had him cornered, and he needed me neutralized before the gala. You're making a mistake, Curtis said quietly. I've made plenty of mistakes, I said. Trusting your son was one. Believing my daughter loved me was another. But refusing $800,000 to stay silent about a federal crime. That's not a mistake. That's the first correct decision I've made in years. Curtis studied me for a long moment. Then he buttoned his suit jacket and stood. I respect your conviction, he said. His voice was level-controlled, showing nothing. But I want you to know that Newton Estate you contributed $1.5 million to buy the mansion where my son and your daughter currently live. He picked up the folder I'd refused to sign. We filed foreclosure paperwork this morning, Curtis said. The loan is in default. Payment is overdue. By the weekend, it will be officially stripped from your daughter's name. The house you funded with your retirement savings will be auctioned to cover outstanding debt. He smiled, certain this was the blow that would finally break me. What he didn't understand, what the arrogance of a man who trusted no one had blinded him to, was that he'd never actually read the recourse clause his own lawyers had drafted. He'd signed it. He'd never read it. He walked to the door, stopped, turned back. You could have taken the money, he said. You could have rebuilt somewhere else. Instead, you chose principle. I hope it keeps you warm at night. The door closed behind him with a soft click. I sat alone in the private dining suite, staring at the half-empty coffee cup. The coffee had gone cold in my hand, but I didn't move, processing the reality that Curtis had just foreclosed on his own son's house, the Newton Estate, the mansion I'd funded with my retirement, the house where I'd lived with my wife, raised the daughter who wasn't mine, built a life on foundations that turned out to be sand. Curtis thought this was a weapon. Thought foreclosing on the property would hurt me, would pressure me into accepting his buyout, would demonstrate his power to destroy whatever I still cared about. But Curtis didn't understand what he'd just done. The guarantee I'd signed, the one with the recourse clause buried on page 11, required the bank to verify my signature against their records. When they did that verification and found the mismatch between my old signature and the new one I'd filed, Clause 15.2c would trigger automatically. The debt would revert to Thane and Celeste. And Curtis had just accelerated that process by filing foreclosure paperwork. The bank would fast-track the signature verification. The recourse clause would fire within days, not weeks. The foreclosure wasn't a weapon against me. It was the trigger for Curtis's own destruction. I finished the cold coffee, set the cup down, stood and walked to the exit. 4 days until the gala. 4 days until Curtis Blackwell stood in the Fairmont Ballroom celebrating his empire, completely unaware that the foreclosure he'd filed that morning had just activated the legal mechanism that would collapse everything he'd built. 48 hours after Curtis's foreclosure threat, Sherwood's attorney called. The bank had completed verification. Clause 15.2c had fired. The attorney's voice was calm when he said the $5 million was no longer my problem. It took me 3 seconds to understand he meant it had become someone else's nightmare. I sat in the Sherwood legal office on Beacon Street, morning light, streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, looking at the document the attorney had placed in front of me. Official bank letterhead. Fraud department stamp. Dated 2 days prior. The signature card you updated in December has been formally rejected by the bank's fraud investigation unit, the attorney explained. He was in his 50s gray suit, The kind of lawyer who'd spent decades translating catastrophe into clean legal language. Your signature on the guarantee document doesn't match the authorized specimen on file. The bank has ruled the guarantee void, ab initio void, from the beginning. He turned to page 2 of the letter. Clause 15.2c has triggered automatically, he continued. The entire debt $5 million principal has legally reverted to the original co-guarantors Thane Blackwell and Celeste Caldwell. They received formal notice this morning via registered mail and email. I looked at the clause text, printed in the bank's official typeface. In the event of signature verification failure, all guarantee obligations revert immediately and unconditionally to primary beneficiaries of loan proceeds. Can they challenge it? I asked. The attorney shook his head. Not without admitting to fraud. Challenging the signature verification would require them to argue that your signature is valid, despite not matching bank records. That argument collapses under any scrutiny. He flipped to the final page. There's an additional detail, he said. The debt includes accrued penalties totaling $387,000. Thane had been defaulting on monthly payments for 5 months. The total obligation now sits at $5.387 million payable within 30 days under the bank's accelerated foreclosure timeline. I sat back in the chair. The trap had sprung exactly as planned, but there was no triumph, just the mechanical click of consequences falling into place. 30 minutes later, my phone rang. Celeste's voice was shaking when I answered, nearly incoherent, words tumbling over each other in panic. Dad, the bank sent a notice. They're saying Thane and I owe $5 million. I don't understand. They're demanding payment in 30 days. I sat on the edge of my rented bed in Dorchester listening without interrupting. I didn't know what I was signing, she continued, voice breaking. Thane told me it was just paperwork for the estate. He said it was standard. I trusted him. And now they're saying we have to pay $5.387 million, or they'll foreclose on the house and come after our other assets. And I don't have that kind of money. She was crying now, full gasping sobs. Dad, please. You have to help me. You have to fix this. I know things have been bad between us, but you're my father. And I need you, and I don't know what to do. I felt nothing. The DNA result, 0.0% biological paternity, had severed whatever instinct to protect might have existed. Her voice was the voice of a stranger asking a stranger for money. Did Thane know? I asked quietly. Did he know I wasn't your biological father when you both signed the guarantee? Long silence on the line. Then, I don't know. Where is Thane now? I asked. He's home, losing his mind. He's been smashing furniture, screaming at Curtis on the phone. He keeps saying this wasn't supposed to happen. What wasn't supposed to happen? Curtis told him the bank wouldn't flag it in time, Celeste said. He promised. He said the fraud department was backlogged 6 months, that by the time they ran verification, the guarantee would already be enforced and the assets transferred. He called it a timing strategy. She paused. He was wrong, so Curtis had orchestrated the entire guarantee trap from the beginning. Not just Thane acting alone. A family conspiracy, father and son designed to weaponize my own signature against me. I'll meet you in 1 hour, I said. Dorchester Avenue coffee shop, the one near the bus station. Thank you, Celeste whispered. Thank you, Dad. I ended the call without responding. She was already seated when I arrived, red-eyed, clutching the bank notice in both hands, like it might disappear if she let go. The coffee shop was half-full, midday crowd, background noise of espresso machines and conversation. I sat down across from her, didn't order anything. What should I do? She asked. Her voice was small, desperate. How do I fix this? I looked at her. This woman who had helped steal my home, who had drained my retirement account, who had stood silent while her husband evicted me into a blizzard, who had lied or lived a lie about being my daughter for 32 years. Get a good lawyer, I said. Not mine. She blinked. What? The FBI already has everything they need, I said. The guarantee, the ledger you gave me, the container theft, the embezzlement trail. You're facing a debt you can't pay and criminal charges you can't avoid. Get independent legal counsel. Cooperate with federal investigators if they offer you immunity. Make whatever deal preserves what's left of your life. I stood to leave. Celeste grabbed my wrist. Please, she whispered. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. If I could take it back, I gently removed her hand from my wrist. You made choices, I said. These are consequences. I hope you find a good attorney. So will you ever forgive me? She asked. That's not a question I'm interested in answering, I said. I walked to the exit, pushed through the door into March cold. Didn't look back. My phone vibrated as I reached the sidewalk. Text message from Leland Sherwood. Penthouse tonight. Must tell you something. I sat on the edge of my bed an hour later, staring at the message. 4 months ago, Leland had handed me Dexter's USB drive in a coffee shop and changed everything. Now he needed to tell me something urgent enough to summon me to the 31st floor. I typed back, "What time?" His reply came in seconds. 8 p.m., come alone. I looked out the window at the gray March sky 2 days before the gala and wondered what truth could possibly be left to uncover. I arrived at the 31st floor penthouse at 8 p.m. the night before the gala. Leland Sherwood's hand shook as he poured the whiskey, and I'd never seen him uncertain before. He stood at the bar cart near the floor-to-ceiling windows, Boston Harbor visible below lights, reflecting off black water. The penthouse was dark except for a single lamp and the city glow. 2 crystal glasses. Expensive scotch, the kind that came in decanters without labels. Leland handed me a glass. His hand was steady by the time it reached mine, but I'd seen the tremor. The crack in the facade. Had the debt transfer went exactly as planned? Leland said, settling into the leather chair across from me. Curtis must be losing his mind. I imagine so, I said. She $5.387 million. Leland continued. Reverted to Thane and Celeste within 48 hours of the foreclosure filing. The bank's fraud department moved faster than we projected. I sipped the whiskey. It tasted like smoke and oak and money I'd never spend on alcohol. You didn't summon me here at night to discuss Curtis Blackwell, I said. Leland looked at his glass. No, he said quietly. I didn't. He stood and walked to the window. Stared out at the harbor for a long moment, hands in his pockets. Stu, I need to tell you something about Congress Street, he said. About why I was there that December morning. About the car accident. I waited. Oh, why did you pull me out? Leland asked, still facing the window. You didn't know who I was. You had nothing to gain. The car was already smoking. You could have walked past. Most people would have. I thought about that morning. The Buick losing control on black ice. The sound of metal crumpling. The man unconscious against the airbag. Because it was what needed to be done. I said. That's all. Leland turned from the window. Looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. That's what I hoped you'd say, he said. But I needed to be certain. He sat back down. Picked up his whiskey glass, but didn't drink. I realized mid-sentence that Leland was about to confess something that could destroy the trust between us. The sudden awareness that this alliance might shatter in the next 60 seconds. I've spent 40 years in business, Leland said slowly. Maritime shipping, port operations, global logistics. I've built companies, dismantled competitors, navigated regulations across 17 countries. And the single most important skill I've developed is knowing who to trust. He set the glass down. When Curtis Blackwell tried to extort shipping contracts from Sherwood Global 2 years ago, I started researching him. His methods, his targets, his patterns. That's when I found you, the COO he'd positioned his son-in-law to destroy. The executive who'd be blamed for Apex's collapse. The man whose retirement Curtis was systematically stealing. Leland leaned forward. I identified you as someone who might want justice, he said. But I couldn't know if you were someone who deserved my help. I couldn't know your character. Not from research. Not from files. I needed to see who you were when nobody was watching. Before I tell you what Leland confessed about that December morning comment, A, if you think the crash was random, B, if you think it was planned, and tell me why in under 10 words. Please note what follows contains recreated details for storytelling. The core message is what stays with you. I engineered the entire accident, Leland said. Not the brake line, I'm not reckless enough to risk killing myself over a stranger. But I made sure I was on that road at that hour on those tires in those conditions. I knew the curve. I knew the ice. I let the car do what ice does to old rubber. He paused. I could have died. That was the point. I needed to know if you would stop. I stared at him. You could have died, I said. Yes, Leland said simply. But I needed to know who you were when nobody was watching, when there was no benefit to helping, when the choice was purely moral. He picked up his glass again. This time he drank. I had to know if you'd pull a stranger from a burning car, he continued. Or if you'd walk past and save yourself the trouble. Because if you walked past, then you would have deserved exactly what Curtis had planned for you. You would have been the kind of man who values convenience over conscience. And I don't help men like that. I sat in silence, processing what he'd just said. Leland Sherwood, 75 years old billionaire chairman of a maritime empire, had risked his own life to test whether I was worth saving. You risked your life to test a stranger's character, I said finally. I risked my life to find a partner worthy of the fight, Leland corrected. Someone who would do the right thing even when it cost him. Someone who wouldn't be bought. Someone who understood that justice isn't about revenge, it's about restoring balance. The whiskey between us had gone from barrier to bridge, 2 glasses marking the distance we'd traveled from strangers to soldiers. We sat in companionable silence for a long moment. 2 men in our 60s and 70s who understood sacrifice and integrity and the difference between punishment and accountability. Tomorrow night, Leland said, shifting tone. The Fairmont. Curtis and Thane will both be there. 300 guests. The FBI has agents embedded in the service staff. Everything we've built for the past 4 months converges in that ballroom. I know, I said. Are you ready? Leland asked. Disash, I said. Leland set down his empty glass and looked at me with the same expression I'd seen on Congress Street 4 months ago, calm, measured, prepared for consequences. What are you wearing tomorrow? He asked. I understood immediately. The gala wasn't a celebration. It was an execution, and we both needed to dress for the occasion. The next morning, the FBI called at 5:47 a.m. to tell me the subpoena had been served, and Curtis Blackwell couldn't find his son. I answered the phone on the first ring. FBI Supervisory Special Agent Reed Campbell's voice was alert, precise. Subpoena was served 40 minutes ago, Campbell said. Grand jury order demanding all Meridian Trust records related to your accounts and the Newton estate guarantee. Curtis made 6 calls to the bank in the first 10 minutes. And Thane, I asked. Ukti, phone's off, Campbell said. Curtis doesn't know where his son is. We're tracking it as potential flight risk, but my guess is Thane knows the trap has sprung, and he's trying to figure out his options. I sat on the edge of my bed in the Dorchester room, watching dawn light creep through the window. Oh, the gala is still on, Campbell continued. Curtis hasn't canceled. 300 guests confirmed. He's either in denial or he thinks he can spin this. Either way, we proceed as planned. Understood, I said. I hung up and opened the closet. The charcoal suit hung in the back. My old Apex Logistics COO uniform from a decade ago. Frayed cuffs. Dated cut. The fabric had gone slightly shiny at the elbows, but it was clean. Pressed. The uniform of who I used to be before Curtis and Thane tried to erase me. I met Leland at the Sherwood office mid-morning. He looked at the suit and nodded. They're panicking, he said. Good. Wear the old suit. Let them see what they tried to erase. At 7 p.m., I stepped through the entrance of the Fairmont Copley Plaza Grand Ballroom. 300 guests in designer gowns and tuxedos. Crystal chandeliers throwing light across marble floors. Orchestra tuning instruments on a raised stage. Champagne fountains. Ice sculptures. The kind of wealth that didn't announce itself because it didn't need to. I walked into that cathedral of money, wearing a 10-year-old suit with frayed cuffs, and every head within 20 feet turned to look. Leland stood across the room in conversation with a group of executives, navy tuxedo perfectly tailored. Curtis and Thane were near the bar. Curtis in black tie, Thane in charcoal gray that probably cost more than 3 months of my current rent. I heard the whispers as I moved through the crowd. Is that Vernon Caldwell? I thought he was. I homeless, yes. What is he doing here? The chandeliers above me cost more than I'd saved in a year. I'd once belonged in rooms like this. Once moved through galas and investor events and corporate celebrations as if they were my natural habitat. Now I was the ghost at the feast. The man who'd been destroyed, walking back into the scene of his own erasure. Thane saw me, said something to Curtis. Both of them stared. I got a glass of water from the bar and stood near the champagne display watching. Thane approached 15 minutes later. Curtis stayed back watching from across the room. Nice suit, Vernon, Thane said. Voice loud enough for nearby guests to hear. Performative cruelty. Goodwill or Salvation Army? I turned to face him. Guests pretended to look at their phones, at the ice sculptures, at anything except the confrontation happening 3 feet away. How are you managing the $5.387 million? I asked quietly. I imagine the payment schedule is challenging. Thane's face went white. The nearby guests stopped pretending not to listen. You think you've won something, Thane said. His voice dropped to a venomous whisper. You think signing over a guarantee makes you clever. You have no idea what's coming. I know exactly what's coming, I said. The question is whether you do. I walked away before he could respond. At 8 p.m., I moved through the ballroom with deliberate calm. Found the waiter Leland had pointed out, young man in his 20s, black vest, white shirt, the subtle earpiece barely visible. FBI plant working the floor. I passed him a folded note as he collected empty champagne flutes. The gentleman near the north pillar, I said quietly. He's expecting this. The waiter gave a subtle nod. Understood, sir. I saw Celeste across the ballroom, the daughter who isn't my daughter, standing alone near a column champagne glass, in hand, eyes red from crying or drinking or both. She saw me, looked away immediately. Wouldn't meet my eyes. I felt nothing. Not pity, not anger, not the ghost of fatherly concern, just the absence where those emotions used to live, which was somehow worse than hatred. 8:45 p.m. Curtis spoke with a Meridian board member, gesturing with his champagne glass, laughing at something. Performing confidence. Pretending the subpoena served that morning was a minor inconvenience. 8:52 p.m. Thane and Curtis conferred urgently near the exit. Heads close together. Curtis's face tight. Thane shaking his head. 8:59 p.m. I stood in the center of the Fairmont ballroom, hand in my pocket. fingers wrapped around the small recording device Leland had given me that afternoon. Not a recording device, a trigger. The orchestra began a waltz. My thumb found the activation button. 60 seconds. Curtis Blackwell stood 20 feet away, laughing with a Meridian board member who would stop laughing in exactly 1 minute. The champagne flowed. The orchestra played. 300 of Boston's elite moved through the space in expensive clothes, carrying expensive drinks, completely unaware that the floor was about to fall out from under the entire room. My thumb rested on the activation button. I thought about the difference between revenge and justice. Revenge wants an audience. Revenge wants to watch the target suffer. Revenge is personal, hot, emotional. Justice just wants the truth. Justice doesn't care if Curtis sees it coming. Justice doesn't need him to understand why it's happening. Justice is mechanical, cold, inevitable. The consequences of actions catching up at exactly the speed they were always going to catch up. 45 seconds. Thane stood near the stage, scanning the room. Looking for exits. Looking for escape routes. The man who'd thrown my suitcase onto a frozen porch and told me to enjoy the shack. The man who'd embezzled millions and blamed me for the collapse. The man who'd married the daughter I thought was mine and turned her into a weapon. 30 seconds. Celeste set down her champagne glass. Walked toward the bathroom. Disappeared through a side door. I wondered if she'd still be in the building when it was over. Wondered if she'd try to run. Wondered if she understood yet that there was nowhere left to run to. 15 seconds. The orchestra swelled. A waiter passed with a tray of champagne. Curtis raised his glass in a toast to someone I couldn't see. 10 seconds. My thumb pressed down on the button. 9 p.m. At 9 p.m. I pressed the button, but 5 minutes earlier, Thane Blackwell had commanded the stage, and I'd had 5 minutes to watch him pretend he wasn't drowning. 8:55 p.m. Thane took the microphone from the event coordinator, adjusting his jacket, smiling at the crowd. 300 guests turned toward the stage, champagne glasses in hand, curious about the surprise announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thane began, voice amplified through the ballroom speakers. "I want to take a moment to share an exciting development opportunity with Boston's most distinguished investors." Curtis sat in the front row, face tight, watching his son perform. "The Newton Estate property," Thane continued, "represents a $12 million opportunity for the right partnership. Premium location, established neighborhood, significant redevelopment potential." I stood in the middle of the ballroom, hand still in my pocket, watching the clock on the far wall. 8:56. 4 minutes. He doesn't know, I thought. Curtis told him to get on stage and pitch to Project Confidence to act like the subpoena was meaningless. So Thane was performing. Selling the very property he'd used to trap me as if the debt didn't exist. A guest near me whispered to another, "Isn't that the estate his bank foreclosed?" Shh. 8:57, 3 minutes. Thane kept talking. Development timelines, projected returns, partnership structures. His voice was steady, rehearsed the pitch of a man who'd sold deals like this 100 times before. 8:58, 2 minutes. I looked at Curtis. He was staring at his phone under the table, checking something, waiting for something. His jaw was clenched. 8:59, 1 minute. Thane was still talking when the lights died. 9 p.m. I pressed the button. The ballroom went black. The orchestra stopped mid-note, a violin sustaining, then cutting off sharply. Thane's microphone went dead. For 3 seconds there was only darkness and the sound of 300 people drawing breath. Then the 9-meter LED wall behind the stage ignited in blue-white glare. The first image filled the screen, a bank document. Meridian Trust letterhead. Internal audit report. The font was large enough to read from anywhere in the ballroom. Meridian Trust, internal audit. Authorization code C. Blackwell. Transaction log. Vernon Caldwell account. Wire transfers. Dates August through December 2014. Authorization signatures. Every transaction approved by Curtis Blackwell. Guests stood frozen champagne glasses halfway to mouths. Thane turned to look at the screen behind him, his face illuminated by the blue-white glow. "What?" he said into the dead microphone. The screen changed. Second document. The guarantee I'd signed. My signature, the old one, the one that didn't match. Curtis's note in the margin, signature card updated, VC signed without reading. Guarantee is locked. Curtis stood abruptly from his front row seat. "Get off the stage," he said to Thane. His voice carried across the silent ballroom. "Now!" But Thane didn't move. He stared at the screen like he was watching his own execution. 90 seconds. The first segment ended. The second segment began. Email thread. Subject line in massive font. Caldwell neutralization. Signature confirmed. I heard 300 people inhale at once. The emails scrolled. Curtis to Thane. VC signed the guarantee this morning. Didn't read past page 3. Exactly as planned. Thane's reply. When do we file foreclosure? Curtis's response. Give it 6 months. Let him think he's stable first. Timestamps. August 2014, September, October. The entire conspiracy documented in their own words. Curtis was moving toward the exit, now pushing through the crowd. Guests stepped aside, staring at him, then back at the screen. "This is," Curtis said loudly. "Someone's hacked the system. This isn't," but no one was listening. They were reading. Another email filled the screen. Thane to Curtis. Dad. Signature card updated, VC signed without reading. Guarantee is locked. Thane. Celeste stood near a pillar, hands over her mouth, crying. "Everyone can see it," she whispered to no one. "Oh God, everyone can see it." 90 seconds. The second segment ended. The third segment began. Body cam footage. Night vision. FBI raid. The Everett container yard. Agents in tactical gear moving through rows of shipping containers. Voice on the audio, FBI, federal warrant. Put your hands where I can see them. The camera zoomed on a container. Meridian Transit Services logo. Container number 3.7 Charlie. An agent opened the doors. Inside, concrete blocks with GPS trackers embedded, stamped with Sherwood Global Maritime codes. An agent reading Miranda rights to someone off camera. "You have the right to remain silent." The footage cut to a second camera angle. Thane Blackwell in handcuffs being led to a federal vehicle. The ballroom was completely silent, except for the screen audio. Final image black screen. White text in clean sans serif font. Federal investigation, active grand jury subpoena, served Meridian Capital Partners, March 10, 2023. The screen faded to black. The ballroom lights rose slowly. 300 guests stood in stunned silence, phones out, recording everything. Curtis had reached the exit doors, but stopped, trapped by the crowd blocking his path. Thane remained on stage, frozen, staring at nothing. A woman in business attire walked across the ballroom floor to the standing microphone. Mid-50s gray blazer, carrying a document folder. I recognized her from news coverage of financial scandals. Victoria Brennan, Meridian Trust's Senior Vice President of Fraud Investigation. A guest near me whispered to another, "Is that Victoria Brennan from Meridian Compliance?" The bank is officially severing ties, I thought, in front of witnesses. On the record, Victoria Brennan reached the microphone, adjusted it to her height, opened the folder. The ballroom was so quiet I could hear the paper rustle. I looked across the room at Celeste. She was crying into her hands, mascara streaking her face. I remembered her calling me Dad when she'd begged for help in the Dorchester coffee shop, back when she still thought that word meant something to either of us. Victoria Brennan cleared her throat softly, spoke into the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Meridian Trust, I realized what Leland had planned. The evidence wasn't enough. The FBI investigation wasn't enough. The debt reversal wasn't enough. Curtis needed to watch his own bank condemn him in front of everyone who mattered. This was the institutional destruction that would follow him forever, documented by 300 phones, witnessed by Boston's elite, delivered by his own bank in a ballroom he'd rented to celebrate his empire. Victoria Brennan's first words into the microphone were, "fraudulent instrument," and 300 people turned to look at Curtis Blackwell. The guarantee document signed by Vernon Caldwell on December 3, 2014, Victoria continued, voice calm and official, has been ruled void ab initio by Meridian Trust's Fraud Investigation Unit. Mr. Caldwell's signature was obtained through deliberate deception. He bears zero legal obligation under this instrument. She paused. Let the words settle. 300 phones were recording. The debt of $5.387 million. Victoria said remains with the original guarantors, Thane Blackwell and Celeste Caldwell. Payment is due within 30 days under the bank's accelerated foreclosure timeline. Meridian Trust is cooperating fully with federal investigators regarding potential criminal fraud charges related to this matter. A guest near me whispered to another, "She just destroyed them, publicly, on record." Thane still stood frozen on stage, staring at nothing. Curtis had his hand on the exit door handle but hadn't opened it yet. Watching, calculating, trying to find an exit strategy that didn't exist. Victoria closed her folder. Meridian Trust will have no further comment at this time. She stepped away from the microphone. Leland Sherwood walked to the stage. He moved through the ballroom with the calm confidence of someone who owned rooms like this. Bespoke navy suit. No tie. The kind of presentation that said, "I don't need to follow your dress code." He took the microphone from Victoria with a nod of thanks. "Good evening," Leland said. His voice filled the ballroom through the speakers. "I'm Leland Sherwood, chairman of Sherwood Global Holdings. Some of you know the firm." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations erupted in urgent whispers. Sherwood Global, that's the Sherwood," someone said, audible in the shocked silence. "The Singapore acquisition, I realized what I should have understood months ago. The man who'd pulled me from poverty wasn't just an ally. He was a billionaire who'd engineered this entire war as casually as scheduling a board meeting. Sherwood Global Holdings, $4.2 billion in assets. The maritime empire that controlled shipping routes across 3 continents. Curtis Blackwell's face drained white. He stared at Leland like he was watching a ghost materialize on stage. This wasn't a peer. This wasn't even a competitor. This was someone who could buy Meridian Trust as a side investment and forget about it by lunch. "No," Curtis said to himself. But in the silence, everyone heard him. "No, no, no." Leland smiled slightly. Not cruel, just factual. This morning, Leland continued. Sherwood Global Holdings completed its acquisition of Web Logistics for $1 with full court authorization under the Federal Bankruptcy Trustees Distressed Asset Protocol. The company had become a distressed asset following recent law enforcement actions, and the trustee approved an expedited sale to ensure continuity of port operations. We saw an opportunity to restructure the organization under new leadership. He turned slightly, looking directly at me across the ballroom. "Hatisikur, effective immediately." Leland said, "Vernon Caldwell joins Sherwood Global as Chief Strategy Officer of our North American Port Operations Division. His compensation package includes a base salary of $385,000, performance-based equity participation, and full executive benefits. He starts Monday. 4 months ago, I slept in a shelter. Tonight, a billionaire just handed me Curtis's company in front of 300 witnesses. The ballroom erupted in murmurs. Phones turned toward me, cameras capturing this moment. I stood in my frayed charcoal suit, the same suit Thane had mocked an hour ago, while a maritime billionaire announced my restoration to executive status. Mr. Caldwell's experience in logistics operations, Leland continued, combined with his intimate knowledge of the industry's ethical challenges, makes him uniquely qualified for this role. Sherwood Global looks forward to his contributions. Leland set the microphone back in its stand, walked off the stage, disappeared into the crowd. Curtis pushed toward the exit doors. "Move," he said to the guests blocking his path. "Move." But they didn't move. They stood there, phones out, recording. A man in his 60s stepped directly into Curtis's path. "Mr. Blackwell," the man said, "my firm would like to discuss our investment accounts with Meridian Capital. Given the evening's revelations, we have concerns about—" "Not now," Curtis snarled, but more people were closing in. Investors, board members, people whose money Curtis had managed. People who'd just watched evidence of his fraud displayed on a 9-meter screen. Thane had collapsed into a chair on stage, head in his hands. The man who'd thrown my suitcase onto a frozen porch 4 months ago looked like he was about to vomit. 300 phones were pointed at me now, not recording my humiliation like 4 months ago when Thane evicted me, capturing my restoration. And I realized this was the moment I stopped being a victim and became something else entirely. Not a victor, just a man who'd survived what was meant to destroy him. Celeste set down her champagne glass. She began walking toward me across the ballroom floor. All eyes shifted to her. The conversations stopped. 300 people watched her move through the space past guests, recording everything, past her father, trapped at the exit by investors demanding answers, past her husband, collapsed on stage in full view of Boston's elite. She walked like she thought I could still save her, like I was still her father. Like the DNA test showing 0.0% biological relationship was a clerical error that could be fixed with the right appeal. She didn't understand. She still didn't understand that the man she'd helped destroy had spent 4 months building a machine designed for exactly this, watching her realize too late that mercy has an expiration date. That forgiveness requires a foundation of truth, and every foundation she'd ever stood on had been built from lies. I stood in the center of the Fairmont ballroom waiting. Celeste reached me, stopped 3 feet away. Mascara streaked down her face, designer dress wrinkled, champagne glass left abandoned on a table behind her. "Dad," she whispered. 300 phones recorded the moment. I said nothing, just waited. Let her carry the weight of whatever words she'd walked across this ballroom to deliver. I left the ballroom before Celeste could reach me and watched through the service corridor glass as FBI Special Agent Reed Campbell put handcuffs on Curtis Blackwell. The chandeliers still glowed behind me. 300 phones still recorded. But I'd turned my back on all of it the moment Celeste started walking, because some conversations don't deserve an audience, and some daughters don't get to use the word dad when it's convenient. Through the glass, Curtis stood perfectly still while Campbell read him his rights. No struggle, no protest. Just that same granite expression he'd worn in the Beacon Hill restaurant when I'd told him no. 2 more agents flanked him, hands on his elbows, and he let them guide him toward the service exit without resistance. 10 feet to Curtis's left, Thane wasn't so composed. He'd backed against the bar, still holding his microphone like it might protect him. 2 agents approached with badges raised, and he actually tried to run, made it maybe 3 steps before they caught his arms and spun him around. The microphone hit the marble floor with a screech of feedback that cut through the ballroom's stunned silence. I felt nothing watching him go down. No triumph, no satisfaction. Just the cold arithmetic of consequences finally balancing. Vernon. Celeste's voice came from behind me, breathless from crossing the ballroom. I didn't turn. Vernon, please. I could see her reflection in the glass. Red dress. Wet eyes. Hands clasped in front of her like she was praying. I didn't know, she said. About the embezzlement. About Curtis. I swear I didn't. Shakitsa, you knew enough. I kept my eyes on the corridor. Curtis was almost to the exit now, Campbell's hand firm on his shoulder. You knew he emptied my retirement fund. You knew he forced me out of my own company. And you stood there in that Newton kitchen and told me it was my fault for not adapting. I was angry. You were complicit. The words landed like a gavel. Behind me I heard her breath catch. He's my husband, she whispered. He's a thief, and you chose him over the man who raised you for 32 years. I turned then, looked at her fully for the first time since she'd slammed that door in November. She'd lost weight, dark circles under her eyes. The red dress hung a little loose at the shoulders, and her makeup couldn't quite hide the exhaustion underneath. She looked like someone who'd been drowning slowly and had just realized the water was over her head. The DNA test, she said quietly. I saw the envelope. You slid it across the table to me yourself. I did. 0%. Yes. Her hands twisted together. That doesn't change. It changes everything, Celeste. It means every birthday, every graduation, every father-daughter dance was built on a lie your mother and I both believed. It means the only thing connecting us now is a lifetime of history and a legal system that says I have no claim to any of it. She flinched like I'd struck her. Here's what no one tells you about revenge. It doesn't feel like victory when your daughter is crying in a corridor while her husband gets arrested 10 feet away. But I'd passed the point where sympathy could derail justice. Mom, the debt reverted to you and Thane this afternoon, I said. 5.387 million. Victoria Brennan made it official about 20 minutes ago, in front of 300 witnesses. You heard her. Celeste nodded slowly. We'll lose everything. Yes. The house, the cars, everything. Everything Thane built on fraud, yes. Everything Curtis financed with embezzled money, yes. Everything you enjoyed while I slept in a Back Bay studio on a borrowed mattress. All of it, yes. Her face crumpled. What do you want me to say? Nothing. I don't want you to say anything. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out $500 bills, held them out between us. She stared at the money like it might bite her. Take it, I said. It's what I can spare. Use it for a security deposit somewhere. Use it for a lawyer who specializes in fraud defense. Use it however you need. But understand this, it's the last thing you'll get from me. She took the bills with shaking hands. Vernon, get a good lawyer, Celeste. Not mine. Someone who can negotiate the fraud charges down to something that doesn't destroy the next 10 years of your life. Tell them you'll cooperate. Tell them everything you know about Curtis's operation. And for God's sake, file for divorce before Thane's assets get frozen. Her voice came out broken. Can you forgive me? I looked at her for a long moment. At the daughter who wasn't my daughter. At the woman who'd chosen a con artist over the man who'd paid for her college. At the only family I had left in the world. I don't know, I said. Ask me in 10 years. Then I walked past her back toward the ballroom and didn't look back when she called my name. The chandeliers were brighter than I remembered. The crowd had split into clusters, some filming the empty stage, some refreshing their phones, some already heading for the exits with the opportunistic speed of people who knew a sinking ship when they saw one. Leland stood near our table, hands in his pockets, watching the chaos with the calm expression of someone who'd orchestrated symphonies before. When he saw me approaching, he nodded once. I nodded back. No ceremony required. Just two men who had built something worth keeping, standing in winter light, ready for whatever came next. 8 months after the Fairmont, I sat on granite courthouse steps in November sunshine and realized I didn't need to go inside to know how the story ended. Leland was in their courtroom 7B, third floor federal plea agreement hearings for Commonwealth versus Blackwell et al. I'd told him I'd wait outside. He'd understood without asking why. After you orchestrate someone's destruction, you don't need to watch the paperwork get signed. The courthouse doors opened at 11:30, and Malcolm Foster stepped out, 48, Sherwood Global's senior legal counsel, the man Leland had assigned to handle my interests in the aftermath. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car, and he carried a leather portfolio that looked older than both of us. Thane Blackwell accepted 14 years, Foster said, sitting beside me on the steps. Curtis took 11. Both waived appeal rights. I nodded. The FBI's evidence had made trials unwinnable. Cooperation was their only play. And Celeste. Foster flipped open the portfolio, scanned a page. Probation 3 years. 1.8 million in restitution to victims. Victims, I said quietly. That's what the paperwork calls us now. Foster closed the portfolio. The court recognizes 18 individuals and entities defrauded by the Meridian Capital scheme. Your name appears 7th on the list. 1.5 million in retirement funds plus penalties and interest. 7th on the list. Not even the worst of what they'd done. Just another line item in a federal fraud case. I watched a young lawyer across the plaza argue into his phone, pacing tight circles near the fountain. Probably his first big case. Probably thought justice was something you won in courtrooms instead of something you built piece by piece over 8 months, while the legal system caught up. Leland said you wouldn't come inside, Foster said. Leland was right. Most plaintiffs want to see the defendants sentenced, want to watch them accept responsibility. But I watched Thane get arrested in a ballroom while 300 people filmed it. I watched Curtis get handcuffed by federal agents at his own investor gala. The courtroom version is just theater for people who missed the real show. Foster almost smiled. Mr. Sherwood said you'd say something like that. 8 months as chief strategy officer at Web Logistics had taught me that revenge doesn't end with arrests. It ends with rebuilding. The port operations I'd restructured were legitimate now. Clean manifests, proper customs documentation. None of the shadow accounting that had made Thane's embezzlement possible. I'd earned $127,000 in salary so far. More than I'd lost to their scheme if you didn't count the interest. Dwight Hayes had sent a thank you card from retirement in Portland last month. He'd signed it, "The driver who stayed honest." His wife's medical bills were paid. His pension was secure. That was justice, too quieter than courtroom drama, but just as real. Celeste's eBay account sold designer clothes for restitution payments. I didn't watch it. Leland did. He'd mentioned it once over coffee. Your daughter listed a Hermes bag yesterday, $1,400, and I'd told him I didn't need updates. Some distances you maintained deliberately. I'd moved from the Dorchester room to a modest 1-bedroom in Back Bay. Not luxury, not the Newton estate, but mine. Paid for with salary I'd earned, not investments someone else had stolen. Is this what justice feels like? Paperwork and prison sentences and restitution schedules? Or is justice just the word we use when revenge becomes legally admissible? I didn't have an answer. Maybe there wasn't one. Maybe the question was the point. Mr. Sherwood asked me to walk you across the street, Foster said, standing. Suffolk County Auction Office. There's a notice posted you should see. Leland emerged from the courthouse as we descended the steps, 75 now, but still moving like a man who'd built empires by knowing when to act and when to wait. He fell into step beside me without a word, and the three of us crossed Congress Street in silence. The auction office smelled like old paper and bureaucracy. Foster led us to a corkboard near the back wall where property seizure notices hung in neat rows. Newton Estate. December 9th. Opening bid $1.85 million. Property sold as is to satisfy outstanding debt obligations. I read the listing twice. My former home reduced to legal description, 4,200 square feet, 0.87 acres, tax lot. 847-B colonial construction, circa 1991. Numbers that described a building, but said nothing about the 32 years I'd lived inside it. The estate you built, Leland said quietly. 32 years you lived there. 32 years in a house with a woman who lied and a daughter who wasn't mine. The building was honest. The life inside it wasn't. Foster checked his notes. Opening bid is 1.85, well below assessed value of 2.35. Foreclosure sales always run low, I said. Banks want guaranteed recovery, not market maximums. Foster glanced at Leland, then back at me. Do you want to bid? You could reacquire the property for significantly less than you invested. Reacquire. As if you could buy back what you'd never really had. The house had always been built on lies, my wife's affair, Celeste's paternity. Thane's fraud layered underneath it all like rot in the foundation. Buying it back wouldn't change the past. It would only decide who owned the future. I looked at the notice one more time. December 9th. 3 weeks away. Enough time to decide if some places deserved second chances or if walking away was the only honest answer. I will send a designated representative to the December auction, I said. Leland's expression shifted, not surprise, but recognition, as if he'd expected exactly this answer. Foster pulled out his phone. Should I add your name to the bidder registration? No. I'll notify you who the representative will be before the registration deadline. Not you personally, Leland said quietly. It wasn't a question. I've been inside that house enough for one lifetime, I said. Someone else can stand in that auction room. Foster made a note in his portfolio, nodded and walked toward the counter to file paperwork. Leland stayed beside me, hands in his pockets, studying the auction notice like it was a chess position he'd been planning for months. The representative, he said. You've already decided. Yes. He smiled, then small, knowing the expression of someone who'd orchestrated his own symphony of revenge and recognized the final movement when he heard it. The Newton estate would be purchased. But I wouldn't be the one standing in that room when the gavel fell. I'd spent 32 years in that house. Someone else could bid for the right to its next chapter. The auction results posted in January showed the winning bidder as Harlan Community Foundation, and I stood outside the glass reading the name of the entity I'd created to buy back my own past. $2.35 million. The exact assessed value. No discount. No bargain. Every dollar paid in full because this wasn't about saving money. It was about transforming what money had destroyed. Harlan Community Foundation. Named after no one. A legal entity Leland and I had created in December, funded with half my web logistics salary and a matching grant from Sherwood Global. The foundation's lawyer had bid by proxy while I sat in my Back Bay apartment drinking coffee and watching the clock. I never entered that auction room. Didn't need to. The paperwork did what paperwork does, transferred ownership from one legal fiction to another. But the house where I'd lived a lie would become a place where people found truth. I turned away from the window before anyone inside could ask if I needed help. January through March was permits and zoning battles. The The Newton Neighborhood Association fought the residential to community conversion, too much traffic, property values, the usual complaints from people who valued quiet streets over fed children. Malcolm Foster filed the variance requests. The zoning board approved them in March with a 4-to-1 vote. One dissenter said converting a mansion into a community center set a dangerous precedent for the neighborhood character. I sent him a handwritten note. The neighborhood's character was built on fraud. This is the correction. Construction began in April. Thomas Mitchell, 44, project architect. The kind of professional who understood that buildings are just spaces until purpose transforms them. Met me in the driveway the first day the demolition crew arrived. He carried an iPad and wore work boots that had actually seen work. Interior walls on the main floor come down first, Mitchell said, swiping through renderings. We'll create an open floor plan community kitchen here, food pantry along the north wall, job resources center where the living room was. I nodded, watching the crew unload equipment. Second floor? Some meeting rooms, counseling offices, financial literacy classroom. He zoomed in on the second floor plan. The master bedroom will become the classroom. 16-seat capacity whiteboard wall computer stations. The master bedroom. Where I'd slept beside a woman who'd hidden another man's child for 32 years. Where Celeste had grown up learning nothing about money or truth. Now strangers would learn both. The iPad is how I'll see progress, I said. I won't be going inside. Mitchell looked up from the screen. Not at all. Not until it's something other than what it was. He understood without asking why. Good architects read buildings. Great ones read the people who hire them. April turned into May. The house I'd known disappeared piece by piece. Mitchell sent weekly iPad updates, walls removed, commercial kitchen installed, accessibility ramps added. I watched the transformation from my car parked in the driveway where I used to pull in after 60-hour weeks at Apex Consolidated. Never went past the threshold. Never needed to. The demolition dust settled. The construction rose. What had been private became public. Sterling Commons. The name Leland had suggested over scotch one night in March. Sterling for quality. Commons for community. Both things they tried to steal from you. I'd agreed because the name didn't reference me, didn't reference them, didn't reference the past. Just described the future. June brought the first surprise. I was reviewing foundation budgets with Mitchell in the driveway when a familiar figure walked up the construction path wearing a volunteer vest. Dwight Hayes. 71. Thinner than I remembered, but moving with the same steady purpose he'd brought to driving me around Boston for 15 years. RT1TC. Portland retirement got boring, Dwight said before I could ask. Saw the Sterling Commons project in the Globe. Thought you could use someone who knows how to move things efficiently. Mitchell glanced between us, sensing history he wasn't part of. You drove 6 hours, I said. 5.5. I speed now that I'm not on the clock. Dwight handed me a folder. Supply chain logistics plan for the food pantry. Donation pickup routes, delivery schedules, inventory tracking. I still know people in procurement. I scanned the folder. Professional. Detailed. The work of someone who understood systems, who'd stayed honest when others hadn't, who'd earned his pension by never taking the bribe twice. Monday, 8 a.m., I said. We'll set up the volunteer logistics office. Bring coffee. Dwight smiled. I always brought coffee. You just never noticed because it was already in your cup. He was right. 15 years of mornings and I'd never once watched him pour it. July brought the second surprise. Construction was nearing completion. The Sterling Commons sign was being installed above the entrance, clean white letters on dark wood. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed redemption or revenge. Just a name above a door. My phone rang. Leland. Grand opening set for October 15th, he said. Contractor confirms we'll be ready. Fire marshal inspections scheduled for September. I watched two workers bolt the sign into place above the porch, where Thane had left my suitcase 14 months ago. This is what resurrection looks like, not returning to what was, but building something new from the ruins. Press wants your story, Leland continued. Herald Globe Regional TV, the anonymous donor who converted his foreclosed mansion into a community center. They're calling it a human interest piece. I didn't do this for a story. I know. But the story might help people who need what Sterling Commons offers. Single parents looking for job resources, seniors needing financial literacy, people who've been defrauded and don't know where to start rebuilding. The workers stepped back from the sign. Sterling Commons, centered perfectly above the entrance. The house where I'd lived, a lie renamed for truth. They want interviews, Leland said. Background on the foundation, your motivation, the timeline from foreclosure to opening. How much you share is your choice. I thought about Celeste selling designer bags for restitution. Curtis and Thane in federal prison. The 32 years of false family dinners in a dining room that was now a job resources center. The question wasn't whether to tell the story. The question was whether I could tell it without rage, without bitterness, without turning justice into performance. I'll think about it, I said. Leland was quiet for a moment. October 15th. You have 3 months to decide if revenge becomes public record or private peace. He hung up. I stood in the driveway watching the Sterling Commons sign catch the afternoon light and wondered which version of the story would serve the people walking through those doors, the truth about what they'd done to me, or the truth about what I'd built from it. I stepped through the Sterling Commons entrance on October 15th and walked into my former home for the first time in 23 months, and nothing about it felt like mine anymore. The foyer where Thane had left my suitcase was now a welcome desk, staffed by volunteers. The walls I'd painted were gone, removed, opened, transformed into sightlines, connecting kitchen to community space to resource center. The air smelled like fresh paint and coffee instead of decades of careful lies. Modest celebration. Small banners reading "Welcome" in English and Spanish. 2 industrial coffee urns borrowed from a church. Folding chairs arranged in semicircles. Nothing that screamed redemption. 80 seniors arrived between 11 and noon, isolated elderly from Dorchester, Roxbury, Jamaica Plain neighborhoods, where people aged alone and stretched fixed incomes across 30-day months. They entered cautiously, the way people do when they've learned that free usually means catch. An elderly woman with a walker approached the welcome desk. Is this really free? The lunch, the resources? Completely free, I said. That's the point. She studied my face like she was checking for the lie. Found none. Nodded and moved toward the dining area where Dwight coordinated food service with the efficiency of someone who'd spent 15 years managing logistics. Leland stood near the job resource computers, satisfied smile barely visible. When our eyes met, he nodded once, the same silent acknowledgement we'd exchanged in the Fairmont Ballroom 18 months ago, but this time without the chaos, without the arrests, without 300 phones recording. Thomas Mitchell appeared at my elbow with 3 community members requesting the building tour. We started in the kitchen. Commercial-grade appliances, stainless steel prep surfaces, walk-in pantry stocked with donation-funded supplies. This kitchen will serve over 200 meals a day, Mitchell said. The dining room seats 80 comfortably. The dining room, where I'd sat across from my wife for 30 years, making conversation that avoided every truth that mattered. Now 80 strangers filled those chairs, talking, laughing, the sound of connection, replacing the sound of careful silence. We moved to the living room, now the job resource center. 10 computer stations resumed templates, online training portals. The carpet where Celeste had played as a child was gone, replaced by commercial flooring built for wheelchairs and foot traffic. "How did you afford this?" one community member asked. "I couldn't," I said. "But consequences did." Upstairs at the end of the hallway, the master bedroom no longer existed. The financial literacy classroom held 16 seats in a semicircle, a whiteboard wall covered in budget formulas, 6 computer stations running credit repair software. A volunteer was explaining bankruptcy recovery timelines to 4 attendees taking notes. I stood in the doorway of the room where I'd slept beside lies for 3 decades and watched a stranger teach truth to people rebuilding after loss. This room finally told the truth, I thought. One honest curriculum doing what 32 years of silence never could. And this house held a lifetime of my life, I said quietly. Now it holds resources for people who need second chances. Back on the main floor, Jennifer Walsh from the Globe waited near the coffee urns. She asked one question: what advice would I give people betrayed by those they trusted? I looked past her to the dining room, where 80 people shared a meal funded by the same fraud that had destroyed my retirement. Kindness is never structural weakness, I said. The mistake isn't being kind, it's letting others weaponize your kindness against you. Never let cruelty teach you to stop being kind. Let it teach you to be kind more carefully. "Have you forgiven them?" she asked. "I've released them from mattering," I said. "That's not the same as forgiveness, but it's enough." Leland joined me near the window as Walsh moved toward Dwight. "Curtis and Thane are in federal prison," Leland said quietly. "Celeste's paying restitution through 2026. But this," he gestured to the room, "this is the part that matters. Revenge got me justice," I said. Transformation got me peace. I needed both, but only one builds legacy. Dwight approached with a clipboard, grinning. 80 people fed, 0 waste. Monday we're expecting 95. Leland watched the room a moment longer. "Do you feel closure?" I looked at the 80 people sharing a meal in the house where I'd lost everything. "No," I said. "Closure suggests an ending. Sterling Commons is a beginning. The revenge ended when the handcuffs clicked. The legacy begins every morning when these doors open." "Then it's not over," Leland said. "No," I agreed. "It's just starting to mean something." The security monitor showed Celeste standing at the iron gates in December, cold, and I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, not the ghost of 32 years pretending to be her father. Just flat recognition, the kind you give a stranger whose face happens to be familiar. Marcus Reynolds stood beside me watching the same screen. 52, former Boston PD, the kind of man who understood that boundaries weren't cruelty, they were architecture. "One same woman as last month in October," Marcus said. "Says she needs to speak with you personally. 17 minutes. It's 34 degrees. I could let her stand there longer, but cruelty for its own sake was Thane's specialty, not mine." "I'll go to the gates," I said, alone. The walk took 3 minutes. The same path I'd walked in reverse 25 months ago with a suitcase and no plan. The same gates that had closed behind me while Thane watched. Now I walked toward them from inside, and Celeste stood outside looking in. She straightened when she saw me pulling her hands from her pockets. Eyes red cold or crying, I couldn't tell. Didn't care which. I stopped 10 feet from the gates. Close enough to hear through the ironwork. Far enough to hold the line. "Vernon," she said, breath fogging. "Thank you for coming. You've been here 3 times, I said. October, November today. I'm making an exception this once." "I'm trying," she said quickly. "Paying the restitution. Seeing a therapist. I got a job doing dental billing. I'm glad you're rebuilding. I want you to know I'm sorry. For all of it. I was wrong. I listened the way you listen to weather reports for cities you'll never visit. Your apology is noted, I said. Her face crumpled. That's it, just noted. Then you have counsel, a probation officer, a therapist, a job. I hope you find stability. I mean that sincerely. Changed into what? I asked when she pushed further. You were a stranger I raised for 32 years because your mother lied and I believed her. Now you're a stranger I don't raise. The only thing that changed is my knowledge. She flinched. That's cruel. It's accurate. Cruelty would be pretending otherwise. So that's all, she said quietly. After everything, that's all. Take care of yourself, Celeste. I pressed the button on the gate control. The iron gates began closing with a low hydraulic hum, the same sound they'd made 25 months ago when Thane had pressed it from this position. 2 years ago, someone else used that button to eject me from my life. I pressed it now to protect what I'd built from the people who destroyed what I had. Celeste didn't move. Just watched the gap narrow, watched her childhood home disappear behind iron and distance. I turned away before the gates fully shut. Walked back toward Sterling Commons without looking back. No anger, no guilt, no satisfaction, just completion. I found Leland by the frozen pond on the eastern grounds, watching winter birds call across the ice. 76 now, but still carrying the unhurried gravity of a man who had spent decades turning patience into power. She came back, he said without turning. Third time. I told her to find stability. Then I closed the gates. Are you at peace? I stood beside him, watching December sun turn the frozen pond from gold to amber to deep blue. Behind us, Sterling Commons prepared for dinner service. Volunteers setting tables, Dwight checking deliveries, Marcus monitoring security. Yes, I said. Not because I forgave her, because I don't need to hold her at all. What's left in that place? Work that matters, I said. A partner who's honest, and nothing left to prove. Leland nodded. Once the same acknowledgement we'd exchanged in the Fairmont ballroom, the same recognition we'd shared outside the Suffolk County auction office. The gates were closed. The doors were open. That was the difference. And to you listening to my story, remember this betrayal can happen to anyone who trusts without boundaries. Don't make my mistake. I spent 32 years being kind without protecting myself. I trusted without verifying. I loved without questioning. When the betrayal came, I had no safeguards, no backup plan. Kindness should never be structural weakness. Be kind, yes, but be kind more carefully than I was. Here's what Family Stories Revenge taught me: justice and transformation are both necessary. The revenge, the exposure, the arrests, that was justice. Sterling Commons, turning my foreclosed home into a community center, that was transformation. I needed both. Justice without transformation leaves you hollow. Transformation without justice leaves you vulnerable. I believe God's timing was perfect. He sent me the right ally to turn destruction into legacy. If this resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment: was I right to close those gates, or should I have given Celeste another chance? Your perspective matters. If you haven't already, subscribe to Dad Family Revenge for more family stories, revenge that end in transformation. Thank you for staying until the very end. Your time is valuable, and I'm grateful you spent it here. Final note: this story contains fictionalized elements for reflection and storytelling. What matters most is the message that even our deepest wounds can become our greatest purposes.